once you finish that first manuscript, it clears a mental block. At least it did for me, because before I wrote The Blacksmith's Boy and finished that first draft, I didn't know if I could do that. After I completed that first draft in late August of 2023, I then knew, oh, hey, you can write a manuscript. You can write a finished draft. And that has helped me the rest of the way.
Welcome to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Fraser, a formerly repressed creative soul turned fiction writer, story editor, and author accelerator certified fiction book coach. At Write It Scared, we tell the truth about why writing a novel is so hard by acknowledging that most writers grapple with two stories: the one they want to put on the page to the best of their ability, and the often subconscious internal story that prevents them from doing it. This show is designed to help you identify and rewrite the internal narrative holding you back while you discover and write the story you want to tell and learn all the tools to help you do that successfully. Join me each week for a new episode where we'll talk about writing to deepen our understanding of the craft and of ourselves as writers. Writing a novel is an inside job that we do not do alone. Welcome to Write It Scared. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hi, writer. Welcome back to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Fraser. Today, we are talking about that messy place that many aspiring authors live, that place between the I want to write a book and I finished a book. My guest, debut fantasy author Bruce Buchanan, spent years starting and stopping and eventually giving up before he finally figured out how to finish his draft and ultimately publish his debut novel. In this conversation, we get real about what actually keeps a story moving when life gets busy and the doubts creep in, and we dig into things that every writer wrestles with: finding momentum after false starts, figuring out where the heck the story should start, building a writing process that fits with your life, and what to do when imposter syndrome hits you hard. So if you've got a story idea, but you feel like giving up, don't. This episode will give you the perspective and the practical tools that you need to start, keep going, and most importantly, finish. Let me give you Bruce's bio, and then we will jump into our interview. Bruce Buchanan is the author of the new adult fantasy novel, The Blacksmith's Boy, and the forthcoming adult superhero novel, The Return of the Cerulean Blur. He is the communications writer for an international law firm and a former journalist, but he's always been a fan of fantasy and heroic fiction. His influences range from the novels of Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman and Terry Brooks to the Marvel comic stories of Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko. He lives in Greensboro, North Carolina with his family. Hi, Bruce. Thank you so much for coming on the Write It Scared podcast. I am so happy to have you here today to talk about your debut novel. How's it going?
Things are going well, Stacy. Thank you for having me.
Right on. So you have a new novel out in the world. It's been out for about a month now, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get into that, why don't you share a bit with our listeners about your journey to becoming a writer and a published author?
All right. I would be glad to. It's been a long and somewhat circuitous journey, to say the least. I've always been interested in writing. I write for a living. I was a newspaper reporter for a number of years, and now I work in corporate communications in a writing focused job. So it's something I've done, but I've always wanted to write fiction, and I've tried a few times over the years, had a few short stories published here and there, but never really committed to it, largely because I kept giving up. And that was for a variety of reasons. I didn't have the time management skills. I didn't have the organizational skills. I didn't have the support network from fellow writers. And finally, about 2.5 years ago, I decided that if I ever really wanted to get serious and get this novel written and get it out in the world, that I just had to do it. And I had to, stop giving up. And so I did, and, I changed some of the things I'd been doing wrong and that proved to be what I needed to get over that hump and get my manuscript written. And then it's all about getting it published. And that's a whole nother story. But, I started writing in early 2023, The Blacksmith Boy, my new adult fantasy novel. And I finished it in late August that year. So, 5-6 months or so.
That was the draft, the rough draft.
That was the first draft. Yes. And it, that was, I didn't quite, it felt like it was a big accomplishment for me at the time because I had never written a full manuscript of a novel, but the work was just beginning then. And that, I knew there would be revisions and I didn't know how many revisions I would make and all the editing and rewriting that goes into that. But
yeah, we call it rough with a capital R for a reason.
Amen to that. Yeah.
The rough draft.
One of the big things I struggled with was figuring out where to start the novel. I wanted to start as close to the action as I could, but I wrote a revised draft that I think started a little too late in that we didn't have a good enough sense of what, the stakes were, what the hero was trying to accomplish or, how he got into this predicament. And a friend, mentor, fellow author, Shelby Reed, read it and made exactly that point was, like, hey, Bruce, you need to back it up a little bit and paint a little more of a picture of why we're doing this and where we're going with it before you start out into the hero's journey. And that proved to be great advice. And that was, my initial instinct to begin with, but I second guessed myself and I needed her to read it and tell me what that my revisions were wrong and I need to go back. And I came up with a third version that started a little sooner, but still captured, some of that necessary context and background. So
yeah, and sometimes we have to. We just have to write that background and that context just to get it down, just to understand it, to understand why the plight is personal and compelling for the main character, and then we got to go in with the scissors.
Yeah.
And figure out how to make it personal and compelling for the character, but also intriguing for the reader. And that is no easy feat at all. So you said that in 2023 is when you decided to get serious and kick this into gear. What was it that drove that decision for you? If there was anything specific.
Well, I don't know if there was any light bulb moment, but my wife is really into painting and has always been, so artistic. She's a writer herself, sort of had that creative outlet and has for a long time and does great work with it. And my son is a guitar player. That's his passion. I was like, well, I really enjoy writing. I need a creative outlet as well. And so they were sort of my inspiration for doing that. I'm like, they're doing things that give them a lot of joy. And so I need to do that as well. So they inspired me to get serious about writing fiction.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just the timing of life too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. My first attempt at writing this particular novel came when my son was a toddler. And I don't want to use that as an excuse because plenty of parents with young children have written novels, but it just kind of proved that was a stumbling block. And I didn't have the time management skills at the time to make that work. But, when I picked it back up, he was in high school, a lot more self-sufficient. So that was a big help. I had a little more free time on my hands.
Okay. Well, so in 2023, you started a new draft for this particular idea,
exactly.
But it was not the first time that you had attempted to write this story.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us about the book.
Sure. That's a new adult fantasy, but the main characters are all between 18 and 21. They're in their adult roles in life, but they're still new to those roles and they haven't quite figured it out yet. It is a heroic fantasy. A young man, Bach Omat, is a blacksmith's son, and he is his rural community's healer. He uses his form of magic called folk magic to tend to crops, minister to the sick. He does a lot working with farmers, with their livestock and things like that. It's a pretty simple existence and one he thought he would be in the rest of his life. But he gets a summons from the kingdom's crown princess, Princess Isabella, who requests his presence in the capital. And he goes there, and it turns out that there has been this spell in a different part of the kingdom that has wiped out a swath of farms and farm families. They're calling it the Blight. And, if it were to spread, it could cause a lot of destruction, a lot of chaos. It's something that they need to get a handle on. And so Bach is this unlikely hero who kind of gets drafted, and it's his first experience really away from home. It's Isabella's first time being in charge of like an important royal mission. And it turns out there's some pretty powerful people behind this spell who don't want them to figure it out. And things kind of get a little dangerous on the road. One of the big themes of this is that in this particular book, the kingdom is very much split up among class lines, and Bach is in the serving class, the bottom of the social hierarchy. And so that's part of what makes him an unlikely hero. He's someone who normally wouldn't be associating with the people who he's on this mission with, but he has a certain set of knowledge that might be helpful to them. And we sort of get into that issue of class structures and, unfair, injustice sort of thing, some things like that. I mean, I don't want to say it's too heavy. It's not. It's an escapist fantasy, but there are some things that I kind of wanted people to think about a little bit. So.
Sure. So what inspired you to write this idea?
Well, to paraphrase Willie Nelson, my heroes have always been heroes. And I've done a lot of thinking about, I've always enjoyed stories about, heroes, and thought a lot about what makes a hero. And I've come to the conclusion that it's someone who strives to do the right thing, even when that isn't the easiest route to go. Those are the types of characters I write about and that I enjoy reading about. I'm very much someone who likes reading about good people trying to do the best they can. Doesn't mean they're perfect. Doesn't mean they always make great decisions, but just people who are trying to do the best they can, often under very difficult circumstances. And also like stories about friendships and overcoming tremendous odds. And so all those elements are kind of in there. My wife says that she can see like influences of things like Stand By Me and The Goonies and things like that, even though it's a fantasy novel, that those types of movies and elements are in play and not even consciously, but just in the back of my mind, those types of things.
Yeah. You're totally speaking my language.
Yeah.
and my decade.
Yeah, that's mine.
Absolutely. Well, and plus they're fun. They're just fun, right?
Yeah.
That's what escapist fantasy gives. I think is one of the beautiful things about it is it gives us it's fun for fun.
Yeah. And
The Goonies is fun for fun. It doesn't have to be anything else. That's enough, right?
Absolutely. And I hope this book is one thing I really thought about when I was writing it, editing it. I wanted this to be a fantasy that people who didn't normally enjoy fantasy would like. There's not a lot of complex world building or magic systems or some of the things that a lot of people really do like and, do well. But I kind of thought that there are a lot of people out there who just kind of want just a pretty straightforward story with relatable characters that just sort of happens to be set in a magical, mythical kind of place. And
it's something for people to jump in and enjoy. And you have another one coming out, right? But for adults.
I do. Well, I think it has a lot of the same themes and ideas, but it does feature an adult protagonist. It's called The Return of the Cerulean Blur. And it comes out in May of next year. Same publisher, Wild Ink Publishing. And this is a redemption story for a middle-aged superhero. Her name is Susan Murphy. And as a young woman, she was the fastest person alive, a costume superhero in this world. But she made a terrible mistake, and a tragic one. And that made her give up being the cerulean blur and kind of set her life into a downward spiral. She's battled depression. Her marriage has dissolved. And worst of all for her, she's become estranged from her teenage son. And he discovers her past, that she was a superhero, and that actually starts to bring them back together. And because he's really interested in that and finding out that she has, done this, and he's encouraging her to put the costume back on. At the same time, she wants to repair this relationship with her son, but her using her powers again gets the attention of someone from her past who has a personal score to settle. And the tagline for the book is, "For Susan Murphy to live, the cerulean blur must run again." And so it's a redemption story.
Very clearly adult superhero redemption. I love it. That sounds so cool. So what's your writing process like now? I mean, what is it like for you to take a kernel of an idea and then complete a revised draft that you're ready to send to your publisher?
I always tell people, do what works for you. There is no one path to doing this. But for me, one of the things I was telling you, like I mentioned earlier, that I had to kick some bad habits for me. I have to be a plotter. I have figured that out. I just can't go the pantsing route. It works for a lot of people. I just can't do it. So for each of my manuscripts so far, I'm now taken to writing out a very detailed outline. And that doesn't mean that I can't revise that as I get into the book, because I do. But I have to have that roadmap. And that's where I start from. And then, we're all busy. So I've learned that if I have a little bit of focused writing time every day, I can get a lot done. Obviously, if I have more than a little bit, that's better. But I try to take a minimum of 20 minutes a day, turn off the phone, don't watch TV, no distractions, and just write and do that every single day. So that's kind of my process. That's what works for me.
Yep. Everybody has a different way, and it takes a while to figure it out,
Oh, yeah.
And each book could be different too. At least that's what I found. My personal experience is that some I have to plot more heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And some, if I plot too much, this is mostly what happens to me. I can get the setup pretty solid, but then I have like these ideas for the rest of it, but then it kind of goes off the rails, and then I got to revamp everything.
Yeah.
It's a messy process. So what did your path to publication look like? Did you know that you always wanted to go the traditional route? Did you query? How did it work for you?
I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to write a book. And I was so naive about the publishing process, and I had no idea how it worked. But then I discovered some fellow writers online, and, that was a huge help to me, to have people to, not only bounce ideas off of, but to steer me in the right direction in the publishing industry, and to be there, like when you get those inevitable rejections, to cheer you up a little bit. But met some people with Wild Ink Publishing, and they actually had a call for submissions for a horror anthology. And I had a short story that I'd been kicking around, and I'm like, well, why don't I write it and submit it and just see what happens? What do I have to lose? And I did, and they accepted it. And that developed a dialogue with some of the people at Wild Ink. And in particular, I started talking with Amy Nielsen, who's a literary agent, as well as at the time she was working. She's also a Wild Ink author and was working on another anthology for them at the time.
Yeah, Amy's amazing. She's been on the podcast.
Okay, yeah, she's great. And then she introduced me to Shelby Reed, who was who wrote Wild Ink's first novel, My Heart is Hurting, and it's an excellent novel if anybody out there wants to read it. And so the two of them, and I started talking with them, and they introduced me, to some of the other people at Wild Ink. And, then I started talking with publisher Abigail Wild. And finally I was like, well, why don't I see if they're interested? And so so they asked for my manuscript, and I sent it to them and chewed my nails for a couple of months while they reviewed it. And they said they wanted to publish it. And that was just such a wonderful day when I got that notification. I decided at that point that they were a publisher I wanted to work with. I was going to, sort of see what happens with them before I did anything else with this manuscript. And luckily they decided they wanted it. So it's been a great experience working with them. And like I said, got some more irons in the fire there for next year.
That's exciting. So you had mentioned that you'd been writing for like 15 years on and off, and that your pattern was to not finish, which a lot of us can relate to. You are not alone by any means. And that's what really struck me about your stories, because you said you had given up a lot, and then you were really, really glad that you didn't. And the heart of the podcast really is dedicated to telling the truth about why writing is so hard, and why we face those moments where we go, maybe I should just put it down, or the times when we do put it down and walk away, and what the internal tape inside that's playing, that's telling us, that's driving those decisions instead of. So that's what I'd like to ask you about next. Can you share times when the creative process, the writing, has gotten hard, and when you felt like you maybe didn't belong there, wanted to quit? What was it like, and what helped you?
Oh, yeah. I actually gave up on this particular book in the past. And that's something I always regretted doing. But, I just didn't quite know how to make it work. And then even working on this book, like I said, I queried some agents and didn't get anywhere with that. And, I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know about these wonderful small presses out there that do great work. Really, what I would say to any writer is, find a support network of other writers who can give you advice, and someone to bounce ideas off of, someone to boost you when you're feeling down. Obviously my family has always done that as well. They've been very supportive, but a fellow writer who knows what it's like to get a rejection email, sometimes it sucks, but you can commiserate about that and, say like, oh, don't worry about it. I got one of those this week too. Keep on keeping on. I would also just encourage people to find ways to get involved in the writing community, whether it's reading and reviewing someone else's book. That's something I've done. And, I didn't realize how much it meant to other writers until I started doing it, and then now that people are reading and reviewing my book, now I get it. I'm like, okay, I get why this is such a good feeling for people. So that's one thing, you can do, or, if it's helping out a writer's organization, a publishing house, anything you can do to get involved in a writing community is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were speaking, it's kind of funny that writing we tend to think of it in such an insular way compared to other activities that we do, right? Our work, for example, whatever it is that we do. I mean, we had to learn to do whatever it is that we're doing, right? We didn't just like
Right.
pop out of the womb knowing how to practice medicine or knowing how to, be a teacher or whatever have you, or a mechanic or anything like that. But and in those roles, we tend to find people who will encourage us. We tend to find people who will critique us. We tend to find people who help keep us organized. We need all of those pieces. So it's not any different when it comes to writing. We need somebody to inspire us, right? And that's often the authors that we look up to. We need people to critique us, to help us grow. Right. And we need cheerleaders to be behind us and be there when we're like, oh my God, why? Why am I bothering to do this? I love the quote that says, if you think you want to write fiction, you should just take an aspirin and go lay down and take a nap.
Yes.
But I think that's true of anything that is a challenge. I mean, there's just going to be times when it's difficult and when we have to, we have to lean on other people. So the point that I'm trying to make is that writing's no different than anything else. It's a challenge. And when you have a challenge, you shouldn't feel bad about leaning on people, finding community. And that's actually the thing that makes it the most beautiful.
Yeah.
Or one of them.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely, that has been such a rewarding thing for me. And I have gotten so much help and leaned on so many people. So when other writers, if they need a favor from me or that, support from me, I do my best to try to return that because I've been the beneficiary in so much of that support.
This is a pay it forward place. It really, really is. I know that the ideology I had when I started writing was that people just wrote books. They were just good at it and they just wrote stories and they did it by themselves, right? Because writing is an isolated activity. You do it alone.
Yeah.
But the bringing the book into the world, or even the bringing the idea to the draft, actually, it's not done in isolation. It's not done alone. No. And that's why, like, the tagline for Write It Scared is writing a novel is an inside job we don't do alone. I mean, it comes from us. It doesn't flourish just because of us. So.
Absolutely.
So when you look back over the years that you've been writing, the years you've been involved in the creative process, what have you learned about dealing with your inner critic? Is there any tips or tricks or anything that you use to just, stay in it?
Yeah, I struggle with imposter syndrome and have for a long time. And deep down, I think that's a big part of the reason it took me so long to write this book. Again, I think having that network of other writers can help you get through that because many of us deal with that harsh self-critic, that inner critic. So having support from other writers can really help overcome that. And I will also say that it makes the inevitable setbacks and rejection a lot easier to stomach because you can look back and say like, well, this didn't work out, but that didn't work out at first either. And look where it ended up. I think the more you do it, the more that self-confidence builds up a little bit. I mean, not that the imposter syndrome ever goes away, but it gets a little quieter.
Yes. Writing is a practice and confidence grows out of practicing.
Well said.
Well, before we wrap up, I ask every guest, what is your wish for your fellow writers out there? Maybe someone similar to you who has written, for a long time, but for some reason or another is having a hard time kicking it into gear, going after what they really want. What wish would you like to impart to them? What would you like to say to them?
I would just say to keep going. You can do this. You can make this happen. It's not easy, but it is doable. And there are people out there who will support you. And one thing I have found in addition to the book coming out next year that's signed, I've got a couple more things I'm working on as well, but that are, in finished draft form that I'm rewriting and, taking out to the world. So I now have 4 finished manuscripts. So once you do one, it gets a lot easier from there.
Oh, that's great. I totally agree. First books, they teach us so much. And one of the biggest things they make us realize that we can take something and that didn't exist before
Hmm.
and take it to the end. And that is an incredible feeling.
It is a
And
good thing.
I hope every person out there who is aspiring to write a novel gets to have that feeling. And now look at
Absolutely.
you got 4 manuscripts right behind you. 4 manuscripts behind you. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for coming on and talking to us about your books and your writing process. Where can listeners find you and find your books?
Well, I guess the best place to find me is my website, brucebuchananauthor.com. Also, I am on the various socials. I am B Buchanan Womble, WMBLE, on X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days. I'm also on Instagram at Bruce Buchanan 7710, and I'm on Blue Sky. If you go to the Wild Ink Publishing website, they've got an author page there. Probably the author website's a great place to start, but I'm not hard to find. I'm out there.
Aw. Well, congratulations again on your debut novel and all of the novels that you have forthcoming. I'm excited for the world to read your stories.
Well, thank you so much. It's a good feeling to have this one out in the world and know that there's more to come.
Thank you for listening to the Write It Scared podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure to hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. And please leave a review. Reviews help other writers like you find the voices and messages they need to hear to continue to write their stories. Let's lift each other up. Remember, you can be scared and still be unstoppable. I'll see you next week.